Hello, and welcome to today's webcast, Navigating ESG Trends in the Energy Sector. Before we begin, I am going to play a brief housekeeping video.
Welcome, and thanks for joining. We're pleased to present our continuing professional education webcast series. Before we begin, please keep the following in mind. You can customize how you view our presentation and interact with the presenter. For better viewing, close all other applications and turn up your speaker volume. You can adjust window size and placement or enter full screen mode using the controls at the top right of the window or dragging the bottom right-hand corner to resize. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of icons that relate to a different aspect of our session. You can download a PDF of today's slides from the Slide Deck and Handouts widget. You can ask questions by typing in the Q&A window and clicking Submit. We'll do our best to answer all questions or follow up via email. If you experience technical difficulty, refresh your browser by hitting the F5 key. Today's session offers 1 CPE credit. To receive credit, you must meet the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy requirements. You must attend at least 50 minutes of the session and respond to at least 75% of polling questions. To participate in the polls, please check the button next to your answer within the slide window and click Submit. We'll track your progress and alert you when you've earned CPE credit. You can then click the certificate icon in the CPE Progress widget and download your CPE certificate. Don't worry if you can't download your CPE certificate today. We'll email you a copy in 2 weeks. If attending this webcast in a group, you must complete our group CPE attendance sheet, available in our Slide Deck and Handouts widget to receive credit. Please have all group members sign it and send only 1 sheet per group. CPE credit can only be awarded to participants registered as themselves and isn't available for participants who view the on-demand version. This presentation is not legal, investment, or accounting advice. We encourage you to seek the counsel of a professional service provider to apply this content to your specific circumstances.
All right, with that, I will turn it over to our speakers to introduce themselves and get us started. Madison.
Thanks, Laura. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webcast today. My name is Madison Poitras. I'm an ESG Senior Manager, part of Moss Adams Consulting Group within our Strategy and Operations practice. My background has been focused in ESG within a variety of industries related to ESG regulatory compliance, reporting with ESG frameworks, internal controls over ESG data, and overall ESG strategy. And with that, I'll pass it over to John and Ben to introduce themselves.
Thanks, Madison. My name is Jonathan Timmer. I'm a senior manager in the Dallas office of Moss Adams. I've been in the energy industry for 12 years here at Moss Adams. And I promise that picture is me, although that was at least 1 extra kid and 1 pandemic ago, but it is me. So excited to be here with y'all today.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ben Alderton. I'm a senior manager in our tax credits and incentives group. I'm located in our Denver office, and I've been working in tax credits on and off for about 12 years now, and with Moss Adams for the last 2 years, primarily focused on credits as it relates to the Inflation Reduction Act that we'll talk about in a little bit.
Great, thanks, Ben. All right, so today we're going to cover what is ESG, the business case for ESG, power and utilities trends and challenges that we're seeing, renewable energy trends, oil and gas trends, and then tips to overcome some challenges. Then we're going to spice it up with some regulatory updates with the SEC and EU applications, and then going to end with some ESG tax credits and incentives. So echoing our agenda, our learning objectives today will be focused on really understanding what is ESG, those fundamentals, and being able to list examples of business cases. We're going to cover common ESG focus areas for each sub-industry in energy, and then we'll provide a quick, fast, and furious update on ESG regulatory landscape, and then talk through those opportunities related to the ESG tax credits and incentives. But before we jump into our content today, I'm going to pass it back over to Laura for our first polling question.
Okay, great. How familiar are you with the concepts of ESG? A, not at all. B, a little. C, somewhat. D, I'm an expert. And the polling questions are located on the slides we are presenting. To respond, please click the button next to the answer you choose and make sure to hit the submit button.
All right, while we're waiting for our responses, I'm expecting it's going to be a mixed bag and a couple of some maybe be experts, or, you know, there might be a handful of not at all, which I feel like this webinar will touch upon. You know, whatever level you're at will be beneficial in the different topics that we're presenting today. So we'll just give it a little bit more time.
All right, we have a good amount of responses, so I'm going to pass it over to the results.
All right, okay, this is very similar to other webinars that we have done. So it sounds like the energy folks are a little, and then somewhat, very little are experts. And then we have a couple that are not at all, which is a great segue into our next section, which is what is ESG? So I'm sure many of you are already familiar with ESG, but I do want to provide a quick refresh for others that might not be as familiar, as indicated by the polling results. ESG is really a set of factors that businesses globally are using to help better capture and communicate decision useful information to a variety of audiences. It's really an opportunity for organizations to tell their story, whether that's taking credit for all of their ESG objectives, and often many times is acknowledgement of improvement areas and goals to be better in the future. It is an opportunity for organizations to drive their competitive edge. So here, this slide breaks down each letter in ESG, starting with the E, environmental. The E in ESG considers how an organization performs as a steward of nature in the global environment. Environmental information includes considerations of greenhouse gas emissions, the use of water, the release of waste, and the use of other natural resources such as forests. It addressed not only the use of energy and physical resources, but also the transformation of the economy and the value chain. Now moving on to the S, the social, which examines how an organization's manage relationships with employers, suppliers, customers, and the communities it serves and where it operates. It refers to resources contributed through relationships with humans. There are many ESG data points that relate to human resources. You also might hear it be called human capital or human capital resources. These include information about employee turnover, diversity, and training. It can also include the protection of personal data that an organization collects. And last but not least, we have governance. The G refers to how an organization executes its transactions and manages its business. It also refers to how an organization is managed by those in senior executive offices and the board of directors. All right, this slide shows specific topics that fall within the umbrella of ESG, also broken down by each letter. Please note these are examples of topics, but there are many more areas that can be included in each of these subcategories. This isn't an all-inclusive list. Additionally, please note these are not bright line classifications. Some sustainability items can be classified in multiple categories, but to give you a flavor of what an ESG KPI, key performance indicator, can consist of, for starting with environmental metrics, you could have greenhouse gas emissions, the emissions intensity ratio, and energy usage and energy intensity and energy mix, a water usage. And then you have qualitative and quantitative. You could have climate oversight and board practices, climate oversight and management practice, climate risk mitigation strategies. KPIs for social metrics could be CEO pay ratio, gender pay ratio, employee turnover, gender diversity, global health and safety metrics. And then for governance, you could have KPIs similar to board diversity or board independence, supplier code of conduct, or ethics and anti-corruption metrics. So we get asked a lot, where does ESG show up? So we're going to talk about where an ESG lives within an organization. And from this visual here, you can see that ESG can add value to various operations within an organization and impacts a variety of stakeholders. So for example, ESG is now a large factor part of the compliance function from specific environmental or climate related regulations, such as the California Senate bills. ESG can also add value related to the E and ESG within the tax group, which Ben will talk about later during this webinar. And furthermore, ESG can add value reputationally for an organization by appealing to their stakeholders by communicating their ESG goals and initiatives. From an industry perspective, an ESG report allows an organization to provide comparable data to support their competitive edge by benchmarking against industry peers. And you can see that ESG reporting will be a collaborative effort amongst the entire operations and your entire company, because ESG can show up in so many different places. Picking back off my previous slide, we're now going to talk about how the recognition of the relationship between social, environmental responsibility, and financial success has really initiated a turn of demand for sustainability information. We've seen a large increase in demand for ESG data, and the demand has only increased in recent years due to a variety of reasons I'm going to briefly cover. So outside of seeing an increase in ESG regulations, which I'll talk more so later in this webinar, there has just been an overall increased awareness of sustainability issues. This awareness is leading consumer, employees, and other stakeholders to demand more responsible business practices. Investor interest, investors increasingly recognize that ESG factors can play and affect the financial performance and long-term development of companies. ESG data helps them assess risks and opportunities that are not traditionally captured in traditional financial analysis. This shift is evident in the growing market for sustainable investment products. And then last but not least, stakeholder engagement. As I mentioned, there's a growing expectation from stakeholders, including customers, employees, and communities, for transparency and accountability in corporate practices. ESG data provides a way for companies to communicate their performance and efforts in these areas. Overall, the growing demand for ESG reflects a broader shift in the global business and investment landscape towards sustainability and responsible corporate behavior. Now we have the business case for ESG. These are just a couple of high-level business cases for ESG, ranging from enhancing stakeholder relationships to an increase in access to capital. Obviously, the benefits and business cases would change based on the specific ESG work being completed and the pain points that the organization is trying to solve. But just to give you an example, and it's like, why would I do ESG? So risk management. ESG practices help identify and mitigate those various risks, including environmental risks like climate change impacts, social risks like labor issues, and governance risks like corruption. Companies that are proactively managing these risks can avoid potential costs and liabilities. Access to capital, we mentioned that investor interest. Investors are increasingly considering ESG factors in their investment decisions. Companies with a strong ESG profile may have better access to capital as they're perceived as lower risk in some cases. Operational efficiencies. ESG initiatives often lead to more efficient use of resources such as energy and water efficiency, which can result in significant cost savings. Waste reduction and sustainable supply chain practices can also contribute to operational efficiencies. And then innovation and long-term strategy. So integrating ESG factors can spur innovation, leading to new products and meeting and evolving market demands, particularly in the realm of sustainability. It also aligns the company with long-term trends and market shifts. So these are just a couple of high-level business cases for ESG and why folks are, dedicated, and why we're seeing this come up more and more in the news every day. And with that, I will pass it over to John to talk through ESG trends related to power and utilities industry.
Thanks, Madison. That was great. So yeah, I'm going to start by just talking about some trends in the various energy industries in which Moss Adams serves. So going to kick that off with the power and utilities. So yeah, as we note here, generally the power and utilities are focused on the E from the ESG. As is common in all the industries we're going to talk about, there's a lot of investments going into these industries. So as a result of these investments, the power and utilities industry has initiated and continued numerous projects toward the goal of grid reliability, stabilization, and flexibility. The industry as a whole has continued to invest heavily in solar power, for example. Speaking a little bit to Texas, where I'm at, solar power generation has grown substantially in the last several years and is becoming a larger part of our client base as well. From 2016 to 2021, power generation has grown from 0.7 million megawatt hours all the way up to 14.9 million megawatt hours. So according to the US EIA, Texas is now only second to California in solar power generation. So I'll save my jokes for Texas versus California for another time. But, in reality, even though solar power has been in the public consciousness for quite a while, it's still a rapidly growing industry. Speaking to the Pacific Northwest, even just in January of this year, the U.S. Bureau of Land Management announced that federal lands in Oregon, Washington, and Wyoming could be used to support the rising demand for clean energy and to meet the current administration's goal of 100% clean electricity grid by 2035. So we're talking about hundreds of thousands of acres of federal land being potentially allocated to clean energy going forward. But really, that's just a small snippet in the overall trend of increasing investments in the power and utilities industry. In a recent survey, a majority of respondents in utilities reported that they expected investment in ESG-related initiatives to be up at least 25%. Over 90% of those surveyed noted some increase in spending on ESG-related initiatives, with a similar percentage noting they expected even more spending in this area going forward. However, there are some challenges related to that. Less than half of utilities noted that they have the right operational structure and skills to support that ESG growth strategy. So to kind of help address that and spur, even more investment in power in utilities and the ESG, as we look at our next slide here, these really are some staggering numbers related to the investment being poured into the energy industry, including the power and utilities industry specifically. Both of these laws created or expanded on funding in order to help utilities achieve some of these goals that were outlined in the previous slide. These initiatives are going to be administered through various government agencies and bureaus. For example, the IRA, or the Inflation Reduction Act, created a new short-term grant program through the EPA to reduce emissions that is available to states, tribes, municipalities, and related agencies. Within the last several months, this program launched grant programs to award $20 billion related to the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund created by the IRA. To qualify, though, an eligible company or entity must first develop a greenhouse gas emissions reduction plan. So another interesting program was created within the Department of Energy, which has authorized the Energy Infrastructure Reinvestment Loans. So these are loans that can be offered to utilities at lower rates than public or corporate bonds. They're intended to help entities navigate their environmental obligations, which aligns again with the DOE's goal of financing the transition to clean energy. This is in addition to the recently announced projects by the DOE to improve the reliability and security of the nation's power grid, among numerous other initiatives that we don't have time to get into right now. But I think these are some fascinating numbers and programs, which really speaks to some of the positive attitude toward a possible net zero future. According to another recent ESG survey, the largest group of respondents believe that net zero emissions and decarbonization could be achieved before 2050, while a combined majority believe that it would be achieved either on or before 2050. So they're really looking forward to that in the next 25 years. To meet these aggressive targets, though, power and utility companies have to align their investment strategies within the lens of ESG to take advantage of new investments, incentives, loans, and credits available to them. When considering which ESG efforts could potentially be the most profitable, high up on the list would include refundable renewable credits, tax credits for energy storage, and carbon capture credits, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well. I don't want to steal Ben's thunder later on, so he'll speak much more intelligently. Probably, I might add to the various tax credits and strategies related to the IRA and the investment opportunities related to that. And then lastly, just with all the considerations and opportunities listed here, there are also some challenges associated with implementing effective ESG strategies. This goes for the other industries I'll talk about here in a little bit as well. In some instances, there's not necessarily a lot of long-term profitability using some of these methodologies under ESG. So increasing costs, resource scarcity still serve as a barrier to delivering energy in the country, whether or not it is, quote unquote, clean energy. Of course, some of the recent laws passed that we're discussing are great at pushing for long-term investment, but public acceptance is key, obviously, and private sector acceptance is key as well to long-term viability. A part of embracing these strategies is implementing an effective reporting framework. We've touched on and highlighted here there are a variety of ESG opportunities in this space to help power and utilities align their policies within this changing business climate. Even with some uncertainty regarding the various reporting frameworks, companies have to continue to strive toward improvement in both their reporting and their operations. Towards the conclusion of this webinar, we'll talk a little bit how Moss Adams can assist with that and other ESG-related strategies. So now let's talk a little bit about ESG trends in renewable energy. So similar to what we talked about in power and utilities, the IRA really sought to really set the table, as far as reaching ambitious clean energy goals with investments in the renewable energy space as well. So, obviously there's been ambitious goals set by, various governments and authorities worldwide, including our own government. We've talked about the multi-billion investments in energy solutions in the IRA. We've talked about the stated goal of the net zero agenda. Some of the examples of these types of programs include regional clean hydrogen hubs, CO2 removal, measurement, reporting, and verification, carbon capture, large-scale pilot programs, energy improvements in rural and remote areas, and regional direct air capture hubs, just to name a few. And these relate to some of the objectives of the Department of Energy and what they're trying to do with the IRA. These are only just a few that have been highlighted by the Department of Energy's OCED, or Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, which was created as part of the initiatives of the IRA. So we discuss here on the slide a little bit too, the EIA has that stated net zero goal by 2050. That goal, reaching net zero emissions globally by 2050 is a formidable goal, obviously. In this scenario, electricity, presumably from green energy, would need to take the place of liquid fuels by a considerable margin. But even the EIA admits that even if supply were to transition faster than demand with the related drop in fossil fuel investment, this will lead to much higher energy prices, even if the world moves towards net zero emissions. So there's obviously some challenges there as well. But I want to talk a little bit here about some of the new businesses emerging and existing businesses that are continuing to expand and thrive, partly because of the investment from the IRA and the IIJA. The carbon capture and storage, there's been a lot of discussion about that in the industry. According to the DOE, there are currently 20 million metric tons per year of carbon capture installed in the US. Optimizing CO2 reduction will require additional global action and requirements. Part of this is due to the increased energy load required for CO2 capture, compression, and storage. The vast majority of this comes from natural gas processing and ethanol production due to their exhaust streams being in such a high concentration. Finding attractive CO2 storage sites involves a holistic evaluation of the technology and commercial factors. There are various projects ongoing to obtain Class 6 certification for CO2 injection wells. The EPA website has a wealth of information on this subject. They do seek public participation on the matter and highlight the importance of environmental justice. And said another way, just engagement of local communities, and ties back to the importance of meeting social needs in the ESG structure. Current carbon capture storage challenges include the evolving regulatory framework, timing of permits, finding good reservoirs, monitoring, and reporting. Obviously, there's a long time horizon related to the actual injection and as well as the post-operational aspects of that. And as we note here, there are numerous investments and numerous projects ongoing. Methane pyrolysis, that relates to thermal energy applied to methane. So, for example, the CH4 chemical bond, there's work being analyzed and done on that to break the chemical bond between the carbon and hydrogen, so we can generate hydrogen gas and a solid carbon product with no CO2 emissions. Obviously, this can create its own side effects, including potentially dangerous health effects and a corrosive reaction environment. But that concludes the extent of my chemistry I'd like to discuss, but I can at least say I made my dad proud today. But so there are other emerging industries as well. There's agricultural agricultural methane emissions conversions. We've highlighted here the EV charging infrastructure, which is a big part of the laws that have been passed and goals of the current administration. There's various others in the traditional quote unquote renewable space, such as wind, solar, and a lot of those industries which our firm has seen and had exposure to. Lastly on this slide, you'll need to consider, depending on your company and where you operate, there'll be various factors such as the capture cost of emissions, regulatory support, stakeholder engagement, and operations post-IRA. Obviously, as part of that, you'll need good accountants and consultants to help strategize on technical and business solutions. So lastly here, this just highlights some of the various projects and initiatives that have been created from those new laws, and this is through the Department of Energy, OCED. Of course, these energy transitions require a strong belief in the risks of climate change, continued government investment, consumer buy-in, and of course, better technology. Obviously, there's been numerous examples of both successful and unsuccessful energy transitions throughout history, but we won't go into that now. But the UN Climate Action Initiative has stated 5 stated goals to jumpstart the renewable energy transition, including to make renewable energy technology a global public good, or, said another way, just meaning it's available to all. Their goal is to improve global access to components and raw materials, level the playing field for renewable energy technologies, shift energy subsidies from fossil fuels to renewables, and triple investments in renewables. Those are some of their high-level stated goals. So again, would just like to highlight the complex nature of all the reporting surrounding ESG strategies and programs. And with that, we will move to ESG trends in oil and gas. So similar to the other industries we've talked about, oil and gas is no different in that we're seeing increased investments, an increased focus on ESG reporting. It's not business as usual, as all facets of ESG have been dominating the headlines. There obviously have been numerous climate commitments from various agencies as well. Again, I'll let Ben speak to the actual credits in more detail, but just want to touch on some opportunities in this space. So there have been so many advances in technology that I think align ESG strategies with improving the bottom line, including numerous ways in which companies are working to reduce flaring within the oil and gas production process, and even if flaring is still necessary, reducing the intensity of that. There's also been huge progress made in the areas of methane detection, including real-time systems that can monitor and detect and result in significant decrease in the shutdown of wells. I think the industry has a proven track record of tackling common problems with innovative solutions. But also there's some challenges to the implementation of further technology, which include obviously the cost and profitability of implementing these changes. You need stakeholder agreement and acceptance of the major changes needed in the regulatory framework to support these processes. As you read more and more on this topic, I think a common thread is that access to reliable energy is at the heart of quality of life measurements. So, oil and gas will be needed to ensure reliable energy for many future generations. And, as we noted, the industry is good at innovation, and they're working hard to build this sustainable future. So I think, here I think companies have to engage in transactions that are accretive to ESG goals. It's important to reduce emissions across the industry. As far as accelerating technology and innovation, I think this is something the industry has done well for decades. Even going back to 1977, Jimmy Carter said the oil and gas in which we rely is simply running out. So I think obviously the oil and gas industry continues to meet the challenges head on. The Mobil CEO, Raleigh Warner, in the same year had a slightly rosier outlook, emphasis on slightly. He said the oil business has come to maturity, And with this maturity comes a new set of challenges. Oil companies have no other choice. So, I think, in today's day and age, we obviously see a lot of challenges in the industry, but I think, the industry has met those challenges and continues to invest in new technologies and solving problems both for the betterment of their communities and improving their operations. And as we note on the slide here, that obviously the nature of energy and oil and gas as well is very water intensive. So water stewardship has become a crucial focus for energy companies as well. Obviously in the upstream facet, fracking requires an enormous amount of water during the development of wells. So companies are looking, at improving and developing recycling ponds and treatment facilities, as well as, related equipment. Those are ways in which the industry is improving the use of water, specifically by reducing the amount of freshwater use. So this also helps benefit the company's bottom line as it reduces related production costs. So, in the midstream space, there's numerous investments made in water optimization and the water infrastructure system. Connecting water systems with wells and gathering systems helps to ensure better practices in transportation, recycling, and disposal of water. I think Madison touched on this a little bit earlier. There's been an increased focus on scatter or information systems. These help tremendously in the detection of various areas, including methane emissions, leaks, and gas flaring. One other thing I wanted to touch on here is the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, which is kind of cool. Actually, you should take a look at it after we're done here. But it's reported tremendous strides in terms of the impact on the climate through their initiatives with their member companies. Since 2017, they report that upstream methane emissions have decreased by 50%. Upstream carbon intensity has decreased by 21%, and low carbon investment projects have brought in over $65 billion related to these member companies. So really, technology continues to play a pivotal role in both its impact on ESG within the industry as well as its profitability. They also note here that their upstream methane intensity target of below 0.2% is now used as kind of a benchmark more broadly in the industry. So, for example, it was referenced in the Environmental Defense Fund's white paper a couple of years ago and partially adopted in the U.S.'s IRA Act, which was signed obviously in August of 22. And then lastly here, in oil and gas, I just want to take a moment to focus on the governance side of things. With this focus on ESG, there's obviously been a renewed focus on the health and safety of employees, which has always been a high priority in the industry. I touched on it. Companies continue to develop and refine systems to protect data. Obviously, cybersecurity continues to be an important aspect to managing operation in today's world. I think better and more complex data systems can help drive revenue growth. And there's just increased demand for data integrity from various stakeholders. It's important to note that companies, they're looking at their physical climate change risk assessment as well, thinking about more than just greenhouse gas emissions. There's just been an increased focus on companies dialoguing with their key stakeholders on this issue. Obviously, it's key to the success of any ESG initiatives that a company had. You have to have employee and stakeholder buy-in. Moss Adams would love to be a part of that success story with you. And with that, I'll turn it over back to Madison. But I think before we do that, I think we have another polling question.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yes. Do you see ESG being a priority for your company in 2024? A, yes. B, no. C, I don't know. And as a reminder, if you would like to receive CPE credit for today's webcast, you will need to respond to at least 3 of the 4 polling questions.
Thanks, Laura. And thanks, John. That was great. Some very industry-specific material. I will say after this polling question, we're going to pivot a little bit to ESG industry agnostic material. So it was great to get that deep dive in here. I'm curious to see, I feel like this is almost a trick question. ESG means a lot of different things, and I'm sure companies have been doing ESG things for a very, very long time. But I think in terms of new ESG initiatives, we'll see what's a priority for 2024.
All right, we'll give everyone just a few more seconds. let's head to the results.
Great. Okay. Well, I think we can tell from the attendance of today's webinar that, that a lot of folks are making this a priority for 2024. It is a very hot topic and something that's becoming more and more normal to include in your day-to-day operations and strategy for your company. And with that, we're going to talk about some overall global ESG challenges. I do want to spend a little time today talking through these challenges related to picking a reporting framework and what many refer to as the alphabet soup in ESG. ESG also loves their acronyms, so you hear a lot of acronyms in ESG. Another challenging aspect when navigating ESG is that it's an ever-changing landscape of regulation. 5 years ago, the challenge was that it was a little bit like the Wild West, where a lot of different things go. But recently, there has been a push for regulations related to ESG reporting, and I'll cover that in a little more depth in our next section today. Another challenge that we see, prioritizing the resource to build towards building out your ESG program and publishing ESG information externally. Companies want to ramp up their ESG reporting, but aren't necessarily willing or able to take on additional staff to spearhead the initiative. So this often falls to finance, legal, or operation team members to tackle this in their spare time. Another challenge that I do want to highlight is related to IT. First, it can be challenging to ensure that you have the systems in place to track and measure your ESG KPIs and the information is truly valuable to your stakeholders. And secondly, there is now a slew of ESG reporting softwares that can be implemented to make ESG reporting a much smoother process. And it can be challenging to know if the cost of a system is worth the benefits, and challenging to identify what features your company really needs to incorporate in that software if you're committed to buy. And with that, we're going to move on to the global standards challenge. So as I mentioned on that last slide, a large hurdle for people developing their ESG programs and reporting externally is determining what framework or frameworks to use. There are a lot of different frameworks out there, and currently there is not one set of standards for reporting. This makes it hard for a company to know which frameworks to follow when setting up their reporting, and it also makes it challenging for stakeholders trying to compare entities when reporting is not apples to apples. The good news is, over the last 3 years, we are seeing some very exciting progress toward bringing all the different frameworks together and moving towards a more universal set of reporting standards, similar to what happened with financial reporting way back when. And when I mentioned the acronyms and the alphabet soup, this is a good slide that kind of shows you a little bit of this. So we put this slide together so that you have some of the more popular frameworks in one spot and have a little more information on each one. So the CDP, GRI, SASB, TCFD, and ISSB are all big names in the ESG space and have widely recognized frameworks. You'll notice when reading through this table that there are a lot of overlap and collaboration between these entities. In fact, the ISSB has assumed responsibility for SASB and also will start overseeing the TCFD framework this year. Without getting too in the weeds here, I do want to highlight some information on the CDP and the ISSB. The CDP, which was formerly called the Carbon Disclosure Project, is the largest global repository for greenhouse gas emissions. The CDP is structured as a questionnaire and disclosure questions for your submission, so it's a very guided process and easy to use. The CDP also highlights that they work with entities to give comprehensive feedback on your climate action efforts. The ISSB, which is the International Sustainability Standard Board, has been very active in this space lately. I'm sure all of you guys have heard about it at this point, either taking over or closely collaborating with all of these other entities. The ISSB in June of last year released the first set of global standards referred to IFRS 1 and IFRS 2, which include general requirements for sustainability disclosures and climate-related disclosures. So this is the closest we've ever gotten to a global universal standard and making sense of that alphabet soup. While there are not currently regulations requiring reporting under these standards, there is an expectation that governing bodies may adopt these standards in the near term. The two IFRS standards fully incorporate the recommendations of the TCFD, which is also the basis for much of the SEC proposed rule that I'll cover in a few slides. The other global challenge we wanted to talk about today before we move on is greenwashing. So because of the lack of uniform standards in the ESG reporting environment, there is a heightened risk of greenwashing. For those that maybe aren't as familiar, greenwashing is when a brand or organization uses marketing techniques to persuade you in believing what they're doing is green when maybe it's not. Greenwashing has actually been around for a very long time, but we're seeing a recent uptick of some big lawsuits and penalties assessed to companies for greenwashing. And it's really good to keep in mind as you're working on your ESG reporting. Lawmakers in the European Parliament recently voted to adopt a new anti-greenwashing law banning a series of commercial practices, including the use of unproven generic product claims such as environmentally friendly or climate neutral. A recent study by the EU Commission found that more than half of green claims by companies in the EU were vague or misleading, and 40% were completely unsubstantiated. Recent studies have shown that companies are hesitant to put out ESG-related information due to concerns that there could be greenwashing repercussions. This is where I'll plug in obtaining that third-party assurance over environmental claims is a great way to demonstrate to your stakeholders that you take greenwashing seriously and that your claims hold up to that scrutiny. All right, and now we have our next polling question. Over to you, Laura.
Great. What is your primary challenge related to ESG reporting? A, complete and accurate ESG data. B, keeping up with regulations and stakeholder expectations. C, system implementation for ESG reporting. D, cost of reporting and assurance over reporting. E, all of the above. Also, you do have the option to submit questions for the presenters in the Q&A window. We have quite a bit of content to cover today, so if we don't have time to respond during the webcast, we will do our best to follow up with you afterwards.
I'm assuming a lot of folks are going to do all of the above, just because that's always a fan favorite when you have it in a polling question. But, you know, we talked about some global challenges. These are all, you know, what we hear from our clients every day about different challenges that they're facing and that we can help and support, whether it's A, B, C, or D, or all of the above.
Okay, great. We'll give people a few more seconds. And I'll pass over to the results.
All right. Looks like all of the above was the winner, but not by much. So it looks like in second place, keeping up with regulations and stakeholder expectations. Okay. Yeah, we're going to talk about regulations after this next section, so we will get into that for sure. So tips to overcome challenges. So when we talk about ESG reporting, one of the most important things to prioritize is consistency, both consistency with your overall organizational mission and strategy, but also consistency with what you're reporting year over year. An important pillar of ESG reporting is measuring your progress against goals over time. And it's not beneficial to your stakeholders if you're changing the metrics and things that you're reporting each year. And that also puts you at risk for only reporting the positives versus giving, you know, the full picture. It's very normal for reporting to change and evolve over time. But again, you need to ensure you're transparent about what's changed and why. So when you establish an ESG reporting cycle, you should be establishing and supporting an internal control environment at the same time to ensure that your ESG reporting holds up to scrutiny or an examination or review. The same principles that you apply to your financial internal controls apply here. So we are looking for controls over the completeness and accuracy of the ESG data being used, appropriate levels of review and approval of that data that is being reported, and when possible, linking ESG data back to the general ledger and ensuring consistency in the data you're reporting across all locations as it shows up in your financials and your ESG report. One of the ways you can support consistency and a strong internal control environment in your reporting is by developing a strong data environment. Along with a strong data environment, you will need strong data governance practices. Data governance provides direction and oversight for data management to ensure the secure, effective, and efficient use of data within your organization. ESG data includes a wide variety of information from a large assortment of sources, going back to my previous slide of where does ESG live in an organization. A strong data management environment will be critical in storing ESG data to ensure your ESG data is, one, protected, but also complete and accurate in your reports. All right, we're gonna mix it up here and now get to the ESG regulation update. So I'm gonna be doing a brief update on this. This is very timely. The SEC is voting on this tomorrow. So I'm going to just give a quick refresh that maybe, others aren't quite as familiar with this, the SEC issued this regulatory proposal in March of 2022 that mandates public companies to disclose climate-related information within financial reports such as your 10K. So with it expecting to be voted on tomorrow, we've already heard that Scope 3 has been scrapped, and we're hearing that there could be potential changes to your Scope 1 and Scope 2 required emission disclosures. We will be publishing a piece on this on a comparison between the proposed rule and the finalized rules, so please stay tuned as we learn more tomorrow. So that being said, this hasn't stopped many of our clients and our market from being very proactive in this space to understand their Scope 1 through 3 emissions, in addition to assurance services over organizations that have already calculated their emissions. A lot of people, when we talk about the SEC climate disclosure proposal, we do focus on those greenhouse gas emissions. I do also want to point out the financial statement disclosures, impact of financial line items related to severe weather events, which we'll be curious to see tomorrow, materiality thresholds and if those have changed. Qualitative disclosures, how climate-related risks are likely to have a material impact on your business model and outlook, and then governance disclosures, which are how your board and management oversee climate risks. So more to come on the SEC climate disclosure. We're now going to pivot to the California Senate Bill 253, which is also known as the Climate Corporate Data Accountability Act. SB 253 will require any public or private company earning over $1 billion in annual revenue that have California operations to publicly disclose their greenhouse gas emissions released from their operations and supply chain. Entities will have to submit their emissions information to an emissions reporting organization that will be designated by CARB, which is the California Air Resources Board. Fees. So if a company fails to adhere to the demands of the law, they will face fines up to $500,000 a year, according to the bill. I do want to note just a quick comparison between California Senate Bill 253 and the SEC climate disclosure. While we're hearing the SEC climate disclosure scrapping Scope 3, I do want to note that there is no materiality with California Senate Bill 253, and Scope 3 is included as a requirement how this bill is currently written. So as the bill is currently written, I keep saying as the bill is currently written because what's next is the California Air Resources Board will need to pass the regulations by January 1st of 2025 before companies can start filing their disclosures in 2026. So, the industry, the governor of California have all been talking about how there could be potential timeline changes, understanding that the 2026 timeline may be infeasible. Again, this hasn't stopped many folks from already going ahead and calculating their scopes 1 through 3. I think in the United States, we're seeing these regulations come up, but internationally, we're a little bit behind compared to some other countries that have already gone full steam ahead with some of these, such as EU, which I will get to in just a bit. Before jumping to California Senate Bill 261, I do want to note there are assurance requirements with California Senate Bill 253. The Scope 1 emissions and Scope 2 emissions will be performed at a limited assurance level beginning in 2026 and at a reasonable assurance level beginning in 2030. The assurance engagement for Scope 3 will be performed at a limited assurance level beginning in 2030, and then TBD for reasonable assurance for Scope 3 at this time. All right. Moving on to California Senate Bill 261, which is also known as the Climate-Related Financial Risk Act. This will require companies with greater than $500 million in annual revenue and are doing business in California to prepare biennial reports disclosing climate-related financial risk and describing measures adopted to mitigate and adapt to that risk. The revenue applicability will be determined based on the business entity's revenue from the prior fiscal year. And this bill would require on or before January 1st of 2026 and every 2 years thereafter to prepare a climate-related financial risk report in accordance with the TCFD framework. So that's another one of those acronyms which was on my reporting slide, which is the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. So what's next? Similar to this, the governor has noted concerns about the overall financial impact of this bill on businesses. So he has instructed CARB to closely monitor the cost impacts in addition to the 2026 implementation date to ensure CARB has sufficient time to adequately carry out these requirements. And then the TCFD report would be the entity would need to make the report publicly available on its own website. Jumping into a little bit more on the TCFD framework. So for those that maybe aren't familiar, the task force structured its recommendations around 4 thematic areas that represent core elements of how organizations operate, which are governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. The 4 overarching recommendations are supported by recommended disclosures that build out the framework with information that will help investors and others understand how reporting organizations assess climate-related risks and opportunities. All right, we're now moving on to CSRD. So CSRD entered into the force last year. The intent of this directive is really to ensure that investors and other stakeholders have access to the information they need to assess investment risk arising from climate change and other sustainability issues through sustainability reporting. The first companies will need to apply these rules for the first time this year in FY 2024 for reports published in 2025. The CSRD does have a broader reach, scoping in large and listed EU companies, as well as large foreign companies who do substantial business in the EU or have securities listed on EU regulated markets. This increases the scope from it was 11,700 companies under NFRD, which was the non-financial reporting directive, to about 50,000 in scope for CSRD. Companies in scope for CSRD will need to report according to the European sustainability standards, and it will be mandatory for companies to have an audit of the sustainability information that they report. This will replace the NFRD regulations. However, those will remain in effect until the company adopts CSRD. So depending on where you align on the CSRD buckets will determine your roadmap for reporting and the different requirements. So similar to the SEC proposed rule, as the SEC currently has it proposed, and the California Senate Bill 261, CSRD overlaps heavily with that TCFD framework. However, where the SEC proposed rule is focused solely around climate-related risks and disclosures, the CSRD requires disclosures from a double materiality perspective with a focus on how business impacts both people and the environment. All right, I know that was extremely fast and furious, so please, we only have limited time today, so if you have any questions at all, feel free to put them in the chat, and if we don't get to them, then we will definitely follow up over email. And with that, I'll pass it over to Laura and Ben for our next polling question.
All right, thank you. Is your company primarily focused on sustainability performance or monitoring ESG as a whole? A, primarily focused on sustainability and environmental impacts. B, focusing on a combination of environmental and social metrics, such as DEI. C, we have a full ESG focus. D, still figuring that out. For those of you who would like a copy of today's slides, you can download them now from the console. We will also be sending them out via email tomorrow, along with the recording of the webcast. Okay, we'll give people a few more seconds. And I'll pass to the results.
Kind of, I would have suspected based on our initial question, you get a kind of a mix of everything there, so not surprising. So let's move on and talk quickly about ESG and tax credits and incentives. One of the things that I often see is companies coming and asking, why should we invest in federal tax credits, or for that matter, state tax credits as well offer a lot of the same similar benefits. And the reason is not only just the management of your effective tax rate, which can help offset some of the taxable income that the taxes that you're going to pay at the end of the year, but it also can provide a rate of return on investment. And then as it relates to ESG, there's usually social or environmental impacts that go along with these credits. So you see economic development in underserved communities. You can see affordable housing that's created and tax credits generated out of the creation of that affordable housing. And then the historic tax credit focuses on rehabilitation or preservation of aging buildings that hold historic meaning and value. And then finally, as we'll talk a little bit about the IRA and the environmental sustainability and the credits that are generated there as we move through things. Traditionally, the investing in federal tax credits required complicated tax equity structures. It does require required entities to enter into a partnership in order to effectively receive those credits. And that's still true for some of the other credits like the new markets tax credits, historics, or even the low-income housing tax credit. But one of the big changes that occurred came about out of the Inflation Reduction Act. And really and truthfully, one of the things that it does is it allows companies to take advantage of the credits that are associated with the green energy transition and the manufacturing of the green energy components as well, and allows for those credits to be done, allows for those credits to transfer, one-time transfer, and which greatly reduces the amount of complexity that we would see in traditional tax equity transactions. The other thing is these credits are not just one time, 1 year. We actually have a 10-year runway for these credits, which is something that's kind of unusual in the industry. We're used to in the tax credit industry of seeing programs being authorized for a period of time, maybe falling off and being reauthorized retroactively. Where here we have a 10-year runway of these credits through 2032. So some of the credits that came out of the IRA and that you can invest in, we've touched on a number of them already. Jonathan talked about carbon oxide sequestration. The traditional ones are your solar and wind energy projects, but there's also hydrogen production, alternate fuel vehicle refueling or EV charging stations, and additionally manufacturing credits like the advanced manufacturing production credit for those entities that are producing components that go into these renewable energy projects. One of the questions that we often receive, though, from our clients that are looking at investing in IRA credits and investing in federal credits in general is, can these tax credits help us also reach our net zero strategy? So a company may have a focus on reaching net zero and would like to be able to report these as something that also helps them, not only manages their effective tax rate, but also helps them along the road towards net zero. And unfortunately, tax credit investing in general doesn't directly support net zero strategies. It does create a tangible benefit within the community. You are supporting these projects, and you can talk about the fact that you are supporting the creation of X megawatts of renewable energy through the purchase of tax credits. However, you don't actually get to offset your net zero and move towards net zero strategies. So what we're seeing, and it's something that's evolving within the market, is there is an emerging opportunity where we're looking for partners that are looking to not only transfer credits out of renewable energy projects, but also pairing those credits with renewable energy certificates, or RECs as they're called within the industry. It's not a perfect one-for-one pair, but it does provide an opportunity for you to also for companies to not only reduce their effective tax rate and manage that tax rate, but it also allows them the opportunity to also talk about net zero strategies, kind of and sort of hit both of those in one fell swoop. And it also further enhances the goals of both the developer and the tax credit purchaser. So it's sort of a win-win within the industry. Like I said, it's not a one-for-one offset, but it is something that is quite powerful, and it's something we're seeing as an emerging trend. I moved through that very quickly, hoping to give Jonathan just a few minutes to finish up here.
Thanks, Ben. I was absolutely right. You spoke very intelligently to that, so much better than I could, so I appreciate that. So yeah, let's wrap up here and just discuss how Moss Adams can help you with your ESG goals and strategies. So obviously we've covered quite a bit of material today. So this last section is just focused on Moss Adams ESG solutions that we can help with your ESG strategy and strengthen your organization's environmental planning and ESG planning. Each of these boxes represent a service that Moss Adams can provide to support your organization's ESG journey. I won't go through each of them here just because I know we're short on time and we want to honor that. But, you know, we do offer, you know, ESG examinations, data analytics, help pursue ESG investment opportunities, materiality assessments, just to name a few. And as we noted, the slides will be distributed. So here are some additional resources that you can look at related to some of the topics that we've discussed today. You know, we're right at about time, so don't hesitate to reach out to any of us with any questions. We do have our contact information in a couple of slides. I think we're at time. So as Madison had noted, if we see any questions, we'll try to follow up with you immediately and help answer any questions. There's our contact information.
All right, thank you, Jonathan, and thank you to all our speakers for a great presentation today. Like you said, if we didn't have time to answer your questions, we will do our best to follow up with you after the webcast. Feel free to reach out to any of our presenters if you have additional questions. We invite you to visit our website for more resources and information on this topic, many of which are linked in your handouts window. If you met all CPE requirements, your certificate is available to download now in the CPE progress window. A copy will be emailed within 2 weeks as well. Finally, here's a link to a survey for today's presentation. Your feedback is always appreciated. Again, thank you for joining us, and take care, everyone.